Good evening. Welcome, welcome. Those who are coming in, we'll give it a few more minutes. Whether you're joining us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Today we are going to be talking about the fear of failure. And I believe that it is the trap that is blocking you from succeeding. And so we're not going to take any time on this one. I'm going to shoot it to you straight, no beating around the bush. I have a couple of points here that I want to make sure that you have, that you're aware. Then I'm going to give you specific ways to fight your fear of failure if this is something that you're struggling with. And the reality is, at some point or another, all of us are going to experience some fear about something, okay? So as you are coming in, hey G, welcome, welcome. Grab your papers and pens so that you can take notes. This one is going to be very straight to the point. As I said, I'm actually going to try to do this one in 30 minutes so you have everything that you need to then take it to the next level, okay? So I'm going to get started with those who are already here. And then for those who start coming in, they can catch up and rewatch. As you know, all of our lives are saved here via IGTV and YouTube and Facebook. So you can always find the recording after. But for those who are joining live, I like it when you join live because then you can ask me questions on real time. So if you have a question, if you have a comment, by all means, send it here. I'm looking at you guys through my phone here. So on Instagram, that is. And so as you guys have questions, shoot away and I'm going to do my best to answer it. Okay? So tonight's live, fear of failure, the trap that blocks you from succeeding. And so my question to you is, have you ever been so afraid at something, at failing at something, that you decide to not even try it at all? Has that ever crossed your mind? Have you ever been so afraid to fail that almost subconsciously, it's like you sabotage your own efforts and you sabotage yourself before you are even able to get there to the finish line? You're already sabotaging yourself. Why? Because you think that if I fail at this thing, stopping now, I'm going to stop now while I'm ahead, because if I do fail, it's going to be unbearable. I actually had a client of mine who he would say, Amanda, I only give 90% effort in anything I do. And I thought, well, what do you mean you only give 90% effort? And he was struggling with fear of failure. And so that's why we started working together. And he says, yeah, I only give it 90%, whether it's in my marriage, with my kids, in my job, in my health, I give it 90% effort. And I said, well, explain to me why. And he goes, well, because if I give 90% effort and I fail, well, it doesn't hurt me as bad because I know that I still had those 10% to protect me. And I always thought, well, if I failed and I really went 100%, then I know I could succeed. Well, I said, well, why wouldn't you ever give it 100% then if you know you could succeed? He goes, well, because I'm afraid that I would fail. So that's the idea, that fear of failure can at times become irrational, but it can persist. And if it persists, then we have a problem. Now, I want you to start thinking about how you define failure for you, because different people are going to have different definitions of failure, simply because you and I, because we have different personalities, we came from different backgrounds, different social status, we will have different benchmarks, right? We're going to have different values or different belief system, and depending on who you are, you might look at something and call that a failure, whereas someone else is looking at that same thing and calling it a success. Why? Maybe because of the lessons learned or the experiences that were gathered. In fact, J.K. Rowling, she said, your conception of failure might not be too far removed from the average person's idea of success. And so sometimes, right, failure for you might be defined as success for someone else. So we're going to figure out how you are defining failure. Okay? And the reality is that many of us are afraid of failing. I don't know that anyone, welcome, those who are coming in, hey, Kels. I don't know that anyone likes to fail at anything. And growing up playing soccer, I tend to be very competitive. Even if you ask, people who are around me now, be it family and friends, I tend to be very competitive in nature. And so truly failure is not something that I necessarily like. And growing up, I had a brother who was also extremely competitive. Now, our competition was in different areas. I was with sports, and whereas Andre, he was in his studies, and he was very competitive about being the best at his studies. But no one wants to fail. No one likes to fail. We would always say, second place is first place loser, right? So I don't know how failure was for you growing up, but fear of failure becomes problematic when we allow that fear to stop us from doing the very things that could move us forward to achieve our goals and our dreams. No one wants to fail. No one likes to fail. But if this fear is paralyzing me, is handicapping me, is causing me to sabotage myself and my efforts, it's causing me to not take advantage of opportunities that are right in front of me, if it's causing me to not take action to the things that are right in front of me, well, now I'm going to have a problem, because then I'm not going to achieve my professional goals. I'm not going to achieve my relational goals, and I'm definitely not going to achieve my health goals, okay? And so fear of failure can be triggered by a specific situation. So maybe you can think of a specific situation right now where you experienced fear of failure. Maybe you were gonna go and public speak somewhere. Maybe it was a project that you had, and you went there in the front, and it was just awful, right? You were stuttering, you couldn't get your words out. A lot of people have fear of public speaking. And so maybe that specific situation where you just bombed at your public speaking, that caused in you such a fear that you thought, I am never going to do that again. Or maybe the opposite is also true. I remember the first time I ever public spoke, whatever I did, it was in a class, and it was a college class, and it was all about that. It was about public speaking. And I had a great experience with it. I didn't know it was something that I would like, but the feedback that I got in that moment, I thought, man, I kind of like this, and it was fun. However, there are people who are doing the same exact things that I was doing, right? Public speaking, but for them, they were like, that was awful, that sucked, I'm never gonna do that again. And so remember, success for you might be failure for someone else. So how are you defining failure? But know that fear of failure can be triggered by a specific situation. It can be triggered in those who experience forms of anxiety, those who are experiencing a form of depression, sadness, loneliness, and this is a huge one, those of us who tend to be very perfectionistic, right? If you are struggling with perfectionism, and we want to do things well, and we want to do things for the best of our abilities, not like my client says he's going to give 90%. We want to make sure that we're giving our 100% effort, but we need to make sure that this perfectionism, this idea that I'm only going to start when it's the best, that is not holding us back. Because if perfectionism is a thing that you are sort of struggling with or wrestling with, it could also make it so that you are not going to attempt things in your life. Why? Because you don't want to fail. Okay, and it'll cause some of the common signs or symptoms that you can see in yourself. Start thinking about it. Is this something that I have? Is this something that I'm experiencing? It's anxiety, avoidance. You avoid capitalizing on opportunities. You avoid it at all costs. Why? Because you're scared to fail. Feelings of loss of control. Now we're going to sort of transition over. Remember, tonight's going to be fast. I'm trying to keep this thing within 30 minutes. I've almost separated in 10-minute sections so that you can write this down and then you can apply it. And then, hey, send me a direct message and let me know if it's been helpful to you. So look, some of the common causes. Okay, Amanda, these are the symptoms. I have a little bit of anxiety. I see that I'm being avoidant and I'm not capitalizing on my opportunities. I see that I am feeling loss of control. You're right. It was triggered by a specific situation. I do tend to be a little perfectionistic when I do certain things, and because I want everything to be so perfect, I end up procrastinating because I never feel like it's good enough, and so I never take flight. But now, what are some of the common causes? What could be some of the root causes as to why you might be experiencing fear of failure? Now, one of the things that psychologists have agreed on is this idea of a critical upbringing, meaning that you were raised in a household, or you're raised by people who were highly critical or incredibly unsupportive of you, right? So highly critical, almost like they put this invisible pedestal that you could never arrive, you could never achieve. It was always something along the line of, you did great, but, or, that was a good job, you scored a goal, but you could have scored 2 more, or you performed really well, but that friend of yours, she killed it. And so maybe you grew up in a household who was very critical of you. Maybe it was almost routine, it was almost common, where you were consistently being undermined, or you were being humiliated, or you always felt like you weren't enough. You always felt like you were trying your best, but it wasn't meeting anyone's expectations. And so what happens is, as you go on through life and you were a little kid experiencing all these things, you're bringing this with you, right? And unless you heal and see your trigger and see that root, you might be feeling right now all of those feelings that you had when you were a child. And so you're carrying around all of these negative feelings in adulthood that started in childhood. So ask yourself that question, right? Did I have a critical upbringing? Was I surrounded by people who were highly critical, who were unsupportive? Was I feeling continually undermined and humiliated? I had a client of mine who she grew up in a very critical household, and she was the oldest of, I don't know, man, she had like 8 siblings, 9 siblings. It was insane. Back then, when TVs were hard to come around, baby making was the thing to do when one was born. And so she was the oldest of 8 or 9 brothers and sisters. And she tells a story how she really liked school. She was very passionate about school, but because her family was so poor, just schooling and education was not really something that was valued, right? And so she remembers really being passionate. She was a great student. She really liked reading. She really liked writing. All of her teachers thought she was extremely bright, that she had a huge future ahead of her. And again, mom and dad, they thought it was cute, go to school, but the focus was, you need to work, right? And they worked extremely hard. They were, her parents were farmers and gardeners, and so she was constantly tending to the field and to the land, and any moment she would get, right, she would run away, do her studies, do her reading, and she would like to go to school. Well, long story short, there's so many details to this story, but long story short, one day she was going to school and she had her books and her backpack, super excited, her uniform, her school uniform. And a friend of her father's said that he saw her outside of school talking to a bunch of boys. It was complete nonsense. It wasn't true. It was recess and, everyone is gathered outside, but the father's friend made it seem like she was skipping school, like she wasn't there, and like she was honestly, hoeing around. That was the idea, right? That here she was, your daughter, I saw her outside with all of these boys, and she wasn't going to school, and she's skipping school, and how could this be? Well, her father, which had 0 emotional intelligence, 0, who was not a communicator, who, had all of these different struggles in his own life, but again, couldn't communicate, 0 emotional intelligence. Instead of asking her and approaching her and saying, hey, like, what is this deal? I had a friend of mine who said you were skipping school. He didn't even ask. As soon as my client comes home, she says that her father proceeds to get all of her books, and books were expensive back then, right? It's expensive now. Imagine back then. And they could barely afford it. A lot of the books that she got were hand-me-downs that were already written and scribbled on. Well, he goes, grabs all of her books, and he just rips them all apart. He just rips all of her books apart. And she said that ever since that day, she never went to school again. Can you imagine? And so look at this, a critical upbringing. And now, she's much older. She's well in her 50s and her 60s. And she never went back to school. And at the thought of going back to school, it just sends, it just chills down her spine. She can't even fathom it. Why? She has so much fear. Look at this. She has so much fear in regards to schooling. Why? Because of this critical upbringing, because of this experience, this traumatic experience that that she had. Okay, so number one, start thinking to yourself, start reflecting, start thinking about your thinking. Could it be that my fear of failure is stemmed from, the root of it is because I too experienced a critical upbringing? Maybe you also had parents who weren't emotionally intelligent, who didn't communicate with you, who didn't talk to you, who didn't ask you questions, who sort of just, because I said so. There was no conversation. Maybe that was the case for you. Now, number two, what is another common cause of those who are experiencing fear of failure? Number two is, how do you define failure? That's what we talked a little bit in the beginning. How do you define failure? Because failure for you might be success for someone else, right? So how do you define failure? And typically, people will fall into sort of two camps about how they define failure. It's really about, what does failure mean? And so for some people, they'll see failure from a personal perspective, meaning, oh man, they take it really to heart, they take it to themselves, and they feel bad about it. Whereas some other people will see failure as sort of part of the process, right? I understand that I need to fail several times before I achieve. It's kind of like Albert Einstein, right? He goes, I know 99 ways of how to not make the light. Look at the perspective he had. Albert Einstein is one that saw failure as part of the process, and he almost saw failure as necessary in order to achieve greatness. Well, how do you see failure? Are you seeing it from a personal perspective, or are you seeing it from a process perspective? I earlier, a couple minutes before going live, I sent my mom a text message, and I said, hey, do you remember when you told us the story of how when Dad was trying to come to America, right? So I was born in Brazil, and my parents migrated over to the U.S., and I'm 29 now, but at the time I was 3 years old, my brother was 2, and my mom tells us that my dad is just, he's a carpenter by trade and just a dreamer by nature, right? And she tells us the story of how when he came to America, he needed to get a visa, right, so that he could come. And so he goes the first time, just denied. And he goes the second time, denied. And at this point, my mom tends to see it personal. My dad tends to see failure through process. And she's like, oh, why do you keep going there? I mean, they already denied you 2 times. And then he's like, no, I'm gonna keep trying. He just had this hunger, and he's like, I'm gonna keep trying. They're gonna have to keep telling me no, but I'm gonna keep going. And so he tries and tries over and over and over again, and he gets denied the 3rd time. Then he gets denied the 4th time, and I think it was the 4th or 5th time that he was actually able to come to America, right? He was actually able to come to America. But that's the thing. Why? Because he didn't take it personal. He didn't get offended by it, because he saw it as part of the process, and he kept trying. And if anything, I think it did the complete opposite for him, right? If you know my dad, he is persistent. If anything, it lit a fire in his butt, and he goes, no. Every time they keep knocking me down, I'm going to get back up. And now look how interesting. My father has a brother, and this brother of his was recently trying to come to America. Maybe, I don't know, a couple years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And the first time my uncle got denied, he never tried again. He goes, if they denied me, they don't want me to go there, and so I don't want to go. Do you see the difference? Look at that. The same situation. My uncle was only denied once, and because he took it personal, he never tried again. My father, he saw that as part of the process. He didn't care, right? So he got denied once, twice, 3, the 4th time he made it. What would have been of his future, of my future, of our family's destiny, had he not been so persistent? Okay, so that's number 2. So remember, first one, did you have a critical upbringing? That could be the root cause. Number 2, how are you defining failure? Are you taking it personally, or are you taking it as a part of the process? Number 3, trauma. And when I want you to think about trauma, I want you to think about people who have experienced a form of difficulty or a traumatic failure. And because that failure was so traumatic, because it was so difficult, they don't want to repeat it again in the future, obviously, because you're not going to want to experience the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment all over again, right? So negative consequences resulting from that failure could have been so traumatic, so difficult, maybe like losing your job or not getting that girl, that it can contribute to this persistent fear of, I'm never going to try that again. Now, silly example, but maybe when you're little it makes a huge difference. But I know, playing soccer, there was one time where I had missed a penalty kick, and penalty kicks are huge, right? Especially when both teams are tied and you have to go into PKs, and the game is going to be decided by if you make it or if you don't. And sure enough, I missed my penalty kick, and I just put in my head that I was never going to do another penalty kick again, right? That was so traumatic. That was so difficult. That was such a hard experience for me, as a little girl, that I thought, man, I'm never going to do that again. Why? Because I felt embarrassed. I felt ashamed. I felt like I let my team down. And so maybe your fear of failure is attached to a traumatic experience from a traumatic experience that you had when you tried to do something and you failed. And luckily for me at that time, I had a really great coach, a really understanding coach, a coach who had high emotional intelligence, and he worked through that process with me, and I was able to take penalty kicks again, and through practice and understanding that, hey, sometimes you're gonna get it, and what, something that he made me see and look at was soccer players who were playing at World Cup levels. Someone like Mia Hamm, who also had missed her penalty kick, and someone like Ronaldinho from Brazil, who also had at one point missed a penalty kick. And so having that perspective, he helped me change my perspective. And so for me, it was traumatic and it was difficult, but I was able to work through it. But maybe for you didn't have someone who was emotionally intelligent in your life at that moment. Maybe you didn't have that dad or that mom or that coach or that friend or that mentor who was able to go through this process for you. And so instead of trying again, you just said, I'm never going to do it again. Okay? So 3 reasons why you might be experiencing this underlying fear of failure. Fear of failure is going to be a symptom from the root, which is either a critical upbringing, your definition of failure, or a traumatic or difficult experience that you had when you tried to do something and you failed. Okay? So now, I want to show you 4 ways that fear of failure. So now we're in sort of our next part here, okay? I want to show you 4 ways that fear of failure is impacting your relationships, your health, and your dreams, your purpose, your passion. Remember, what we're trying to do here in our time together, and what I just do my whole life, is that I try to teach people 2 things: emotional resilience and emotional intelligence. And these 2 words are really the definition of character. Character is what you actually are, who you actually are. And character is the sum of thoughts that lead to actions, actions that become habits, right? Habits are things that you repeatedly do, actions that you repeatedly do. And those habits form your character, and your character will lead you to your destiny. So if I'm forming my character, I need to make sure that I understand my emotions, that I can dominate my emotions. This is emotional intelligence, that I can understand, cope with my emotions and the emotions of the other, and understand the emotions of the other. And then I want to make sure that I'm emotionally resilient. Why? Because life is going to knock you down. Life is hard. And I need to make sure that when I fall, I'm getting back up. And so we need to be able to dominate sort of this triangle of death, which is stress, fear, and anxiety, and be able to live and operate in the triangle of life, which is quality relationships, health in all areas, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, and be able to also be doing something that you're passionate about, living out your purpose. And so fear of failure, remember, it's the trap. It's the trap that is keeping you from succeeding, from accomplishing everything that you could be accomplishing. And so number 1, you're going to be experiencing low self-esteem. People who fear failure are going to be engaging in negative self-talk. They're going to have low confidence. And because of that, it's going to make it very difficult for them to pursue their goals. Obviously, imagine if you have negative thoughts on replay, and that negative thoughts are bringing low confidence, of course, because if every single, if I'm going to do a live here and my mind is saying, wow, that's going to be awful, wow, it's going to suck, no one's going to watch, no one's going to like it, I probably won't show up for a live. Failure is a feeling. Look at what, in her book, Michelle Obama, in her book, Becoming, she says that failure, look at this, is a feeling long before it becomes an actual result. Isn't that interesting? Look, failure is a feeling long before it becomes an actual result. That's what I just told you what character is. Look, thoughts become actions, right? So failure, this thought, this feeling, becomes an action. Of course, thoughts become actions that form habits that form your character. And is part of your character someone who is afraid of failing? And if so, do you have this consistent just replay of negative self-talk? And then she goes, it's vulnerability that breeds with self-doubt, of course, low self-confidence, and then is escalated often deliberately by fear. So I really, really like that quote. So now I want you to ask yourself this question. I have 4 questions that I want you to ask. I'm going to give you 4 ways that fear of failure is affecting you, and I'm going to give you 4 questions that I want you to ask yourself. Question number 1. Do you often tell yourself, I'll never be good enough, I'm never going to get that promotion, I'm not smart enough, I'm not quick enough, I'm not fast enough, everyone is better than me? Are these some of the thoughts that you have going on? What does your negative talk look like? Okay, number 2. So not only is fear of failure producing low self-esteem, the fruits of fear of failure, low self-esteem, maybe for you it's poor motivation. When something seems too challenging, if something requires me to learn a new skill, those who experience fear of failure typically and often will give up before they even get started. That's the way we are sabotaging yourself. Are you, because your motivation is so low, are you not stepping up to the plate? You don't even put the bat in your hand. You don't even know how it's going to be. Why? Because of poor motivation. So ask yourself this question. Again, you might be experiencing all 4 of these. You might be experiencing 2 of these. See which ones that you are currently experiencing. Ask yourself this question. Am I reluctant to try new things or to get involved in challenging projects? Are you the type of person that you give up before you even get things started? And for those of you who are perfectionists, maybe this could be your thing, right? I'm reluctant to try new things or to get involved in something challenging because it needs to be perfect and I don't know that I have the skills. It is often the case that you are not going to be qualified for a certain position. But when you are in that position and you start seeing things that you need to tweak, and then you start to become qualified. In fact, if you look at the stories in the Bible, you see a bunch of men and women who oftentimes were not qualified. But when God called them, God begins to qualify them, what? Through the experiences that they're going to have. Man, I see it over and over again, even when I work with people, right? If I look back at right when I left college and I started doing this thing, and even maybe from the first time I preached to the first live to the first client, things start getting better. You start getting experience. You start fine-tuning your skill. So poor motivation sort of puts you in the backseat of your life, and you're waiting around, waiting for a perfect opportunity when there isn't a perfect opportunity. Perfect opportunities are the opportunities that we capitalize on, that we take action on. Here's number 3, self-sabotage. Now, there's an interesting little research that found, look at what it says. Research has found that students who fear failing often engage in self-handicapping behaviors that actually limit academic success and perpetuate failure. Isn't that interesting? Look at that. Because they feared failing, they were engaging in self-handicapping behavior. Maybe like they waited last minute to study, right? Or maybe they had a big test, but they decided to go out that night. Self-sabotaging. Are you sabotaging yourself because you are so afraid to fail? And are you limiting your success? Remember, fear of failure is a trap that is blocking you from succeeding. So ask yourself this question. Am I currently procrastinating? Am I leaving for tomorrow what needs to be done today? And if you are continuously doing that, ask yourself, why am I self-sabotaging? Could it be that you are so afraid to fail that you don't even give yourself a chance? There's a client, I was talking to him this morning, and we're kind of working through some of his stuff and ways that he sabotages himself. And for him, he always leaves for tomorrow what can be done today. Always. He is your typical procrastinator. And man, we go to town, him and I would say, son, you can't do that. You have to do things today. And it was brilliant. Today, in our session together, he had to go, what? Oh, Renee's telling me to get water, but it's really because I'm losing my voice. I'm I'm a little sick. I almost canceled tonight's live, but I'm glad I didn't. Because I said I was going to do something, and so I'm going to do it, right? There you go. I'm talking about fear of failure. I thought, oh, it's not going to be good. I'm tired. I'm sleeping. I'm this. I'm that. I don't feel well. But you got to do it anyways. Okay, so look. I was talking to this client this morning, and we're talking about fear of failure, and I'm giving him a hard time because he was procrastinating, and we're trying to figure out why he's sabotaging. And so he's like, wait, I need to get something. I told him to get his journal that he takes all his notes in, and so he goes and gets his journal, and he's walking towards me, and he hits the desk, and all of these books fall on the ground, and I just hear the books fall on the ground. I see him, right? I see all the books fall on the ground, and I wanted to see what he was gonna do. And so he looked at me and he laughed because he knew exactly what he was supposed to do. Typically, his response was, oh, I'll do it later. I'll do it after our session's over. I'll get to it tomorrow. In that moment, he's like, okay, so look, thoughts produce actions. Remember, actions make habits. Because the thought is, I would do it tomorrow, his actions are tomorrow. And he created a bad habit of leaving things for tomorrow. But in that moment, he looked at me, I laughed, he laughed, and he goes, I'm going to pick up these books right now. I said, yeah, you are. And so he starts picking up the books and he starts stacking the books. Why? Because of that. One of the ways that he was self-sabotaging himself was that he was engaging in self-handicapping behavior for him, leaving things that he needed to do today for tomorrow. And he had to be intentional about saying, I'm going to do this right now. We're not going to get into this right now, but man, I can just go hours and hours and hours on bed making, right? When you get up in the morning, make your bed. Just do your bed. It's not later, not after you brush your teeth, not after. You wake up, you put your foot on the floor, make your bed. Don't hesitate. Don't procrastinate. Don't leave it for tomorrow. We start creating bad habits, and making your bed is something that you do every single day. It's something so small, something so silly. However, habits are that. They're little things that we consistently or inconsistently do will form the bedrocks of our character. Welcome, those who are coming in. We are on the fourth thing. We're talking about fear of failure, and we saw symptoms. We already saw where it could come from. We saw that either from a critical upbringing. We saw your definition of failure. Maybe you experienced a very a huge traumatic failure that just left a bad taste in your mouth. And now we're looking at ways in which it is impacting you. So we saw low self-esteem, poor motivation, self-sabotaging behavior, and finally, this one's a huge one. It's this idea of shame, okay? When you and I fail, it can trigger feelings of worthlessness. So what are we gonna do? We avoid trying in the first place, obviously, because I don't want to feel feelings of worthlessness. And so I'm not even going to try things in the first, kind of like my client who was saying I only give 90%, right? And he even said this, he goes, even when it comes to my relationship, Amanda, I'm only going to give 90%. I said, well, why? And he goes, well, at the chance that it fails, look at this, at the chance that it fails, then I'm not going to get hurt because I kept 10% for myself. But think about it. If you're going into a relationship with people and you're not fully giving of yourself, right? Of course, if you're not being intentional, if you're not being passionate, if you're not being excited, if you're always holding something back, how good is that relationship going to be to begin with? But because this client was so afraid of these feelings of worthlessness that he would even avoid trying in the first place to protect himself, and we do this also to protect ourselves from disappointment, from regrets, and from sadness, all the while knowing that the very things that we're trying to protect ourselves from, by not going there and trying, we are going to experience anyway when we start seeing everyone else, hit their purpose, get into that relationship, meet their health goals, and we're over here sitting in the bleachers, waiting around. Now look, I want to read this to you because there's a huge, there's so much study and research on this idea of shame. And this is a topic that we're going to do in one of our lives together because shame is an emotion that can really mess us up. So look, shame is physiologically and psychologically toxic emotion. Here's why. Because instead of feeling bad about one's action, that would be called guilt, right? If you're feeling guilty, you are upset because of a certain action that you did that you should not have done, Remember, thoughts lead to actions. Maybe those thoughts led to a negative action and you're thinking, man, I feel so much guilt. And that guilt is good. In fact, the Bible says that God produces in us godly sorrow, almost like godly guilt, because that regret and that guilt will lead us to the feet of Jesus, where there we will find forgiveness and pardon for our sins. Hallelujah. That's perfect. Well, also, we can experience something like regret. And how would we experience regret? So, this is how shame is different, okay? So shame is toxic because what? Instead of feeling bad about an action, that's guilt, or of our efforts, right? I didn't give it my best efforts. Man, I should have done better. Man, I should have studied more. Man, I should have woken up early. That's regret, right? I wasn't fully prepared because I procrastinated, or because I went to that dinner and I should have come back home early. Look, I experienced regret this week when Renee and I were such early birds. I mean, we're in bed by 8:30. I mean, 9 max. And Sunday night we went to an event, and after that the event actually ended pretty early. We would have been home early, but then Renee was like, "Hey, do you want to go watch a movie?" And it was such a great movie. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. It's called King Richard. It's the documentary of Serena and Venus Williams, the tennis players, right? And it was such a great movie, but it started late because it was the only time it was available. I think it was like 7:40 or 8 o'clock, and we were in Miami, and then we went to Boca and we watched it there, and I think we got home at like 11:30. Now, of course, Renee and I rarely and barely do anything like that, right? We always get a hard time from our friends because we are like grandparents, right? Who sleeps at 8:30, 9? We do, right? And we like to wake up super early. We're up by 4 a.m. And of course, that the night we decide that we're gonna, be a little wild, live life on the edge, right? We get home at 11:30, and River, one of our twin boys, he wakes up, and I kid you not, he's up from 1 to 5 a.m. Like, he was up all night. I don't know what happened to him. And he was having the best time of his life. He was talking, he was engaging, he was in the best mood. Renee and I wanted to kill him, and we were in the worst mood. And Renee's like, "We're never going to do anything like that again." I was like, "Okay, well, we are going to do things like that again." But so we were experiencing a little bit of regret. We were experiencing a little bit of, oh man, right? All these actions, and now we're feeling guilty because now, and we just had such a brutal day on Monday and Tuesday. It was awful. We're struggling. But here's the difference. Shame makes you feel bad about who you are as a person, like intrinsically, like in character, okay? So you're experiencing guilt. That's fine. You're experiencing your regret. That's fine. We could have experienced regret, but I didn't experience shame, right? I wasn't intrinsically upset because of who I am. I didn't feel worthless. I wasn't ashamed. I didn't feel bad about who I am at my core. So depending on how you are looking at failure, if shame is accompanied by failure, clearly you are now attacking your core character. That's the difference when we come to someone with criticism, right? When we come to someone with criticism, that's when people start to defend themselves. Why? Because when we criticize someone, we are attacking their character, and no one wants their character to be attacked. Because why? Because now we're having feelings of worthlessness and of shame. Okay, so those are the 4 things. And now look, well, how do we overcome this thing? I always tell Renee I'm going to end early, and then I can never do it because I start getting excited. But here we go. Look, how do we overcome fear of failure? And I'm going to give you, I think it's 4 ways or 3 ways. Okay, so number 1, consider the outcomes. This is what you do. Think about the worst possible scenario, okay? Write them all down. This is the absolute worst thing that can happen. So let's say if it's public speaking, on your way up stage, you can fall on the floor. And when you fall on the floor, you're wearing a dress and everyone's gonna see your underwear, right? It could be that when you get up there, you're gonna go blank. You're not gonna remember anything that you said. Or you could get up there and you had all your notes prepared, but as soon as you look at your iPad, all of the notes have been erased. Whatever, put the worst absolute case scenario. You're gonna go ask that hot girl out, and she's gonna take one look at you and she's gonna be like, "Have you lost your mind?" Put all of your worst case scenario, the worst possible outcomes, and then you're gonna come up with a plan on how to deal with each one of them. How to deal with each of these worst case scenarios. The problem is sometimes we create such a huge thing in our minds, and really when we start putting it out on paper, we start saying, "Oh, this isn't a big deal after all." There's author and investor, he did a really cool tech talk. His name is Tim Ferriss. You probably heard of him. And he recommends this idea of fear setting. And he says, create a checklist of all the things that make you afraid, of all the things that you are fearful of, that will happen to you. And then he says that when he did that, he did just that, right? He put all of his fear setting, all of his list, and then he'd find ways to attack it. And look at what he says. He shares, in doing this, it enabled me to tackle some of my hardest challenges, resulting in some of my biggest successes. So that's the plan. Remember when I told you about my dad, who he kept trying to get this visa over and over again? Well, the opposite could also be true. When you consider the outcomes, consider the worst case scenario, but also consider the best case scenarios, because the worst case scenarios you can plan for, and the best case scenarios it's going to encourage you and motivate you to keep going. There's a verse in Hebrews 11. If you have your Bible, you can turn there. You can just write it down. It's Hebrews 11, verses 24 through 26. It's talking about Moses. Remember the guy who parted the Red Sea, who sent all the plagues in Egypt to deliver the Israelites? That guy. And so Hebrews 11, 24 through 26 says this. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Verse 25, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. That is the secret. Look, so consider the outcomes, the negative ones, and then plan for it, and then the positive ones, because it's going to motivate you. The reason why Moses was able to deny his pleasures, the reason why he opted to suffer with the Israelites than to have pleasure with the Egyptians was what? What does the Bible says? Because he looked to the future reward. So consider and count your outcomes. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, he says this: think about what you want today and you'll spend your time. Think about what you want in 5 years and you'll invest your time. Oh, I love that quote, right? So if you're coming in, welcome. I'm glad you're here. You're kind of towards the end of our time together, but you can always watch the replay on IGTV, YouTube, Instagram, all the social media platforms. It's going to be there, okay? This is one you don't want to miss, because at some point or another, you and I will experience a little bit of fear of failure, but we just need to make sure it's not paralyzing us, procrastinating us, etc. So look, I'm going to say that James Clear quote again because I thought it was brilliant. Think about what you want today and you will spend your time. Think about what you want in 5 years and you will invest your time. So consider the outcomes, the not so great ones, the worst possible case scenarios, but then also consider the best possible case scenarios, because it's going to motivate. Number 2, set approachable goals. It needs to be realistic. It needs to be attainable. Now look, you can set either approach goals or you can schedule and set avoidance goals. What does that mean? Psychologists have found that when you are creating goals, if you create approach goals, meaning you are positively reframing avoidance goals, like, oh, it's going to be worse because of all of these reasons, it's beneficial for your well-being. Why? Because whenever you have a difficult or unpleasant task that you want to do, you unconsciously set goals around what you don't want to happen rather than what you do want to happen. And so after you've considered the worst case scenarios, right? After you consider the outcome and the best case scenario, you want to make sure that you're setting goals based on approach goals, not avoidance goals. I don't know if any of you enjoy or like mountain biking. I don't know if any of you enjoy or like mountain biking, but Renee and I, we love mountain biking. And it's something that we would do before River and Reed came along. Renee actually proposed to me while we were mountain biking. And one of the things early on that we learned is you don't look at where you don't want to go. You look at where you want to go. And so when you're in the trails, right? And we would often ride in Markham and Ocala and all these parks. And man, there are hills and rocks and jumps and all these things. And you would want to look at where you wouldn't want to go, right? You would want to look at the rocks and the ditch and this and that. But if you looked at those things, you would end up riding over these things. So what did we want to do? We wanted to make sure that we looked at where we wanted to go. That's what it means to set approach goals. Set approach goals by, after you consider the outcomes, make sure that you're setting goals based on what you want to achieve, not on the negative. Remember, set goals around what you do want rather than what you don't want, okay? And keep this in mind. When you set goals, make sure that these goals are tiny. If you're experiencing fear of failure, it can be very overwhelming. So don't have some crazy goal, one thing at a time. I put here, look, sometimes you don't even want to focus on the end. Just focus on getting that promotion or graduating that MBA. Just focus on the next step. My motto in life has been do the next thing. There are sometimes big plans or big dreams or big things you have, or sometimes even if you look at the year, it can be overwhelming. But just focus. Once you have maybe that year goal, start breaking it down into months, break it down into weeks, break it down into days, into bite-sized pieces. Here's number 3. So number 1 was what? Consider the outcomes, positive and negative. Number 2, after you've considered the negative outcomes, set approach goals, meaning focus on what you want to accomplish, not what you don't want to accomplish. Focus on where you want to go. Stop looking at where you don't want to go, like mountain biking. And finally, number 3, redefine failure. Redefine failure. Oh, there's 4. Okay, redefine failure. I like this quote. It says this, look. Remember, taking a new step, uttering a new word is what people fear most. The real fear should be the opposite course. We need to fear not growing. We need to fear if we're not taking a new steps. Why? Behind every fear is this huge worry that we are going to do something wrong, that we're going to look foolish, that we're not going to meet expectations, but we need to redefine those failures. How are you going to redefine your failures? Again, are you going to look from a personal perspective, or are you going to look at it from a process perspective? Okay, so redefine failure, and you can also even redefine your successes. Redefine failure, redefine success. John Maxwell, he says it like this: 90% of all those who fail are not actually defeated, they simply quit. Right? You are not actually defeated. You just have to redefine your goals, redefine that idea of failure, and when you do, then you won't quit. You're going to keep on pushing through. And finally, number 4, start looking at fear of failure as what are the lessons that I have learned in this. You need to understand that, the chips aren't always going to fall to your favor. The chips aren't always going to be exactly that. It's not going to be just one smooth, run to the top. It doesn't work that way. But what happens when we fail? We have an opportunity now to be even more prepared. We have an opportunity to take out valuable experiences from this no matter the outcome. I tend to be a very unconventional therapist, if I can even call myself that. But traditional therapy is you're doing sessions there once a week, right? 1 hour a week sessions. Well, my style of therapy is a little different. I like to do 3-month programs where we're very intense and we're speaking several times a week. That's what I like to do. And when I transitioned over to these things, it wasn't a straight shot because a lot of people aren't used to therapy or in this way. And so I got a whole lot of no's. I had to do a whole lot of tweaking, but every single time it was a lesson learned. Every time it helped me tweak. In fact, I was talking about it with Renee the other day, and I said, man, if this had not been successful, right? If this had been successful, I wouldn't have learned as much as I learn now. Failure is part of it, and we need to fail for several reasons. And so start looking at failure as what are the lessons that I can learn from here. I want to share with you a woman. She wrote this book. It's called The New Technology of Success. Her name is Carol Dweck, and I think she's the same woman who talks a lot about this concept of grit. And she says this: the author describes how failure has an effect on people who don't believe they can learn from their mistakes. So pay attention to this. If you feel like you cannot learn from your mistakes, then you are going to have fear of failure. When you fail, it's going to knock you down and you're going to stay down. But look, she explains how this kind of fixed mindset, if you are not flexible, if you are fixed, if you feel like you cannot grow, when you fail, it's going to hit you hard. Look at what she's saying. She explains that this kind of fixed mindset could lead to a single failure appearing worse. This is because such individuals see themselves as finished products rather than a work in progress. If you feel like you no longer grow, if you feel like you've already arrived, if you feel like you are already at the top of all the talents or skills or ability, surely failure is going to knock you down, because think about it. If I'm a finished product and I keep failing over and over again, well, it seems like I'm not a finished product after all, right? However, if I feel like I'm a work in progress, and that's exactly how the Bible defines you and I. The Bible says that character development is the work of a lifetime. So if I know that who I am is going to continuously be changing, that every single day I need to work through my thoughts, my actions, my habits, and my character, that every single day I need to be intentional, and I need to try, and I need to work hard, and I need to get up, then when I do fail, I'm going to think, well, this is part of the process. I'm progressing, I'm working, versus I'm already a finished product. There's nothing to be added. There's nothing to change. And then she says, yet at the other end of the spectrum, people with growth mindsets perceive such setbacks as opportunities to advance. When you fail, the mindset should be, what are the lessons that I learned? How can I pivot? How can I overcome? What do I need to adjust? What do I need to fine tune? Renee and I can tell you, this past 2 months, I think has been one of the biggest growth months of our lives, because we've experienced so much failures, like failure after failure after failure, setbacks after setbacks after setback. But it's only made things more organized. It's made things more fine-tuned. It's brought us closer. I mean, the list goes on and on, okay? So failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of success. Put that in your mind. Put it as a motto of your mind. Tell it to yourself every single day. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of the success, okay? So now look, those who are here, we're going to come to a close here. I did it. Look, instead of an hour read, I did it in 50 minutes. Very amazing, right? Okay, so look, I'm going to end with the last 10 signs, okay? So all the chunk of what we did is in the first part. So if you came towards the end, I would highly recommend that you go and you watch that, so you know the root causes, so you know the common symptoms, so you know how it's affecting you relationally in health, and how it's affecting your dreams, and also what are the 4 ways that you are going to overcome fear of failure. But if you're just joining us now, just something that you can ask yourself right now. I'm going to read to you 10 statements, 10 signs that might demonstrate that you are experiencing fear of failure. You think, well, how do I know? Well, I'm going to give you 10 signs. Now, again, this is not an official diagnosis, okay? If you feel like you've had a lot of these character traits, a lot of these criteria, then it's going to be important that you take this thing one step further. So here it goes. I'm going to boom, 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 run after the other. Number 1. Failing makes you worry about what other people think about you. Just answer yes or no. 2, failing makes you worry about your ability to pursue the future you desire. 3, failing makes you worry that people will lose interest in you. 4, failing makes you worry about how smart or capable you are. 5, failing makes you worry about disappointing people whose opinion you value. 6, you tend to tell people beforehand that you don't expect to succeed in order to lower their expectations. Oh man, that's a huge one. In fact, I get into these tangents, but I just remembered yesterday I sent, we wanted to hire someone to do something for us, okay? And I asked her, I said, well, what are your prices? And she sent me her price. Okay, and when she sent me her price, she didn't even give us enough time to look at it, but she immediately already said, hey, like, if you think that's too high, like, I could lower my price, da-da-da. And I thought, oh, man, she's selling herself short. In fact, I thought the price was great. I wasn't going to complain about the price at all. But when she did this thing, it was almost like, man, it reminded me of number 6. You tend to tell people beforehand that you don't expect to succeed in order to lower their expectation. If the price is too much, we can always lower it. We can fine tune it. And I didn't think about that at all. But because I know this person, I know they have great work. But if I didn't know this person, if I hadn't seen any of their work, I'd be thinking like, man, like, is this person really going to do what I hope that they're going to do? Should I actually pay this person? Maybe I should find another. Confidence goes a long way. Here's 7. Once you fail at something, you have trouble imagining what you could have done differently to succeed. This is the growth mindset, right? If you fail and you're stuck and you can't think of ways that you can pivot, ways that you can do things differently, well, we're in a tough situation. Number 8, you often get last-minute headaches, stomach aches, or other physical symptoms that prevent you from completing your preparation. 9, you often get distracted by tasks that prevent you from completing your preparation, aka procrastination, which in hindsight were not as urgent as they seemed at that time. There are things that you are doing that is not urgent. You're using it to distract. Why? Because you're procrastinating. Why? Because you're afraid to fail. And finally, number 10, you tend to procrastinate and run out of time. Okay, run out of time. There's no such thing. Time doesn't run out. You're responsible of time to complete your preparation adequately. So those are the 10. If you saw yourself in any of these, it's important that you start thinking about your thinking, reflect, pray, and figure out what we're going to do. Why? Because fear of failure is the trap that is going to block you. It might block you. No, it's going to block you from succeeding. That's what I have for you folks. I'm going to go to sleep. It's past my bedtime. And I will see you next week, next Wednesday at 8 p.m. See ya.